In a time of national crisis, one state is caught in the crossfire. Its people are divided, its government is struggling, and its very future is on the line. This is the incredible story of North Carolina, a state under siege.
Okay, so let's get right into it. During the American Civil War, North Carolina was in a seriously tough spot. I mean, it wasn't just about fighting the Union Army on some faraway battlefield. Nope. It was about battling all these crises right at home. We're talking a population that was deeply divided, an economy that was completely falling apart. It was a state at war for sure, but maybe the biggest enemy was itself.
So, where do we even begin this story? Well, it starts with one of the biggest problems of all, this immense pressure to build an army, and the powerful resentment that it created all across the state. Now, what's really wild is just how much North Carolina contributed. The state sent about 125,000 men to fight for the Confederacy. That's more than any other Southern state. But then, look at the other side of this chart. Only 37 generals. You can start to see why a lot of folks in North Carolina felt kind of slighted, like their massive sacrifice just wasn't being respected by the leadership in Richmond. Just take a second and imagine that. Imagine being told you have to leave everything, your family, your job, your entire life, to go fight in a bloody, brutal war. No choice. Well, that was the reality for thousands of men because of a policy called conscription, or as we know it, the draft. And let me tell you, it became one of the biggest problems for North Carolina's governor, a guy named Zebulon Vance. And this really gets to the core of the issue, the huge difference between volunteering to fight and being forced to fight. A lot of people thought conscription was just plain unconstitutional. It was gutting farms and businesses of their workers and leaving families to fend for themselves. So instead of building unity, this policy just fueled anger and resistance all over the state. So how did people push back against this? Well, in all sorts of ways. You had some men, they called them draft resistors, who just flat out refused to go. They'd hide out in the mountains or disappear into the swamps. Then you had soldiers who were already in the army just walking away, deserting. Whole families would get involved, helping their sons or husbands escape. And some men, they took the biggest step of all. They actually joined the Union Army to fight against the Confederacy. And, this kind of simmering tension, it doesn't stay quiet forever. Sometimes it just boiled over into absolutely shocking violence, pitting North Carolinians against each other. And a perfect, tragic example of this is what's known as the Shelton-Laurel Massacre. This timeline just lays out how ugly this internal conflict got. So in early 1863, a group of people who supported the Union raided a town to get salt, which was super valuable for preserving food. In response, Confederate forces came in and just rounded up a bunch of suspects. But instead of a trial, they executed 13 of them, men and boys, in cold blood. Governor Vance was horrified. He ordered an investigation, but the officer in charge, he was just allowed to resign. It was this incredibly dark moment that showed just how deep the divisions in the state really were. Okay, let's shift gears now. We're going to head to the coast and see how North Carolina fought a totally different kind of war, this desperate economic battle against the Union Navy's blockade. So Governor Vance could see his state was basically being choked off from the rest of the world. And his solution? It was bold. It was daring. He decided to get into the smuggling business. The state sponsored its own ships, these blockade runners, for a super high-risk, high-reward mission, to sneak right past those Union warships and bring back the supplies they desperately needed. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of an action movie, right? First, you had to get a special kind of ship, long, sleek, and super fast. Then, the really dangerous part, you had to make a mad dash at night, right past the Union Navy. If you made it through, you'd trade Southern cotton for European goods in places like Bermuda, and then smuggle everything from guns to shoes to medicine back into the port of Wilmington. So, did it work? Oh yeah, the results were absolutely incredible. Just listen to what Governor Vance said they brought in. 250,000 pairs of shoes, 50,000 blankets, cloth for 250,000 uniforms, tons of food and medicine. It's pretty safe to say that because of these blockade runners, North Carolina's soldiers were probably the best equipped troops in the entire Confederate Army. But here's the really tragic irony in all this. While the state's blockade runners were doing an amazing job getting supplies to the soldiers, all those resources were heading straight to the front lines. And that meant life for the civilians left behind became this desperate day-in, day-out struggle just to survive. So the Union blockade, even if it wasn't perfect, made everyday things incredibly hard to find. And you know what happens then? Prices just explode. Get this, a barrel of flour that cost about $18 at the start of the war cost $500 by the end. I mean, how are you supposed to feed your family when basic food costs that much? For most people, it was just impossible. People had to get really creative just to get by. Women took on brand new roles, running entire farms and working in factories. The state was so desperate, it even set up its own salt works, just to preserve what little food there was. But that kind of ingenuity couldn't stop people from starving. And that desperation eventually boiled over. In cities like Salisbury, hungry citizens, mostly women, actually started rioting in the streets, demanding food. So you've got the forced draft, starvation, constant fear. All that pressure didn't just cause hardship. It literally fractured North Carolina's society. It turned neighbors against each other and created a population that was always on the move in total chaos. The war basically put the whole state in motion. You had these two huge groups of people moving in opposite directions for totally different reasons. For thousands of enslaved people, the Union Army meant a chance at freedom. They escaped Union lines, built their own communities, and eventually even joined in the army to fight for their own liberty. At the very same time, you had wealthy plantation owners fleeing the coast, moving inland to get away from the Union soldiers, and often taking their enslaved people with them. This was a time for secrets, too, and for spies. Brave men and women from all backgrounds got into the spy game. You had Abraham Galloway, a man who had escaped slavery, spying for the Union. And on the Confederate side, women like Rose O'Neal Greenhow and Emmeline Piggott risked everything to gather intelligence. It was incredibly dangerous work. Greenhow actually drowned off the coast trying to escape a Union ship. You know, by 1864, people in North Carolina were just done. They were exhausted by all the death and the hardship. And that feeling fueled this really powerful peace movement, led by a newspaper editor named William W. Holden. Their goal was pretty radical. They wanted North Carolina to go around the Confederate government and negotiate its own separate peace treaty with the Union. Basically, they just wanted out. Well, this put Governor Vance, who was running for re-election, in a completely impossible spot. He was walking this political tightrope. To win, he had to prove to one side that he was totally loyal to the Confederacy, while also convincing the other side, the frustrated, tired supporters of the peace movement, that he wasn't just a puppet for the government in Richmond. It was a balancing act that was almost impossible to pull off. So after all this turmoil, all this fighting, all this hardship, what was the legacy of the Civil War for North Carolina? When the dust finally settled, what was left? It's really no exaggeration to say that North Carolina was changed forever. The war left this deep, permanent mark. Society was just fractured by all those internal conflicts. Families were ripped apart. But in the middle of all that chaos, incredible things happened too. Thousands of enslaved people seized their own freedom. The roles of women in society grew in new ways, and the state's economy, it was left in total ruins, forced to rebuild everything from the ground up. And that really leaves us with this big final question. Is this a story about heroism, about brave soldiers and daring blockade runners? Or is it a story about hardship, about a broken society, forced service, and terrible suffering? The truth is, it's all of those things at once, isn't it? It's a complicated, painful chapter, and it makes us think about how we remember a war that was fought not just on some distant battlefield, but in the towns and on the farms of North Carolina itself.